When you look at these images, what do you feel? For me, it's hard to describe, but it's a strange mix of calm, anxiety, and familiarity. These are liminal spaces, a genre of image I'm sure you're probably familiar with, and they depict uninhabited, almost dreamlike spaces. And over the past few years, they've become a staple of internet culture. They get their name from the word liminal, which refers to the transitional stage between two spaces or periods of time. For example, a hotel hallway is a liminal space, as it is somewhere we're not meant to linger in for long. To me, liminal spaces have always had a dreamlike quality to them, partially because of the fact that they always feel familiar in some way. Take the backrooms, for example. While I've never been to where the photo was taken, it does still have an odd sense of familiarity to it. With how familiar some of these images feel, it's strange that they still give an almost ominous feeling, like something is very, very wrong, even though there's no active danger. This is why I compare liminal spaces to dreams, as not only do they give me the same feelings, but some of these images are specifically created to invoke the emotion of dreams. And this finally brings me to what I want to talk about tonight. A game that not only perfectly captures the mix of calm, anxiety, and familiarity that one might feel with liminal space imagery, but it also perfectly captures the feeling of dreams. And that game is Yume Nikki. Was released in June 2004 by Kikiyama, and as of me writing this, just recently turned 20 years old. It's a very difficult game to talk about, as despite being made in rpgmaker, it has barely any RPG elements, with the only ones it does have likely being a remnant of the software used to create it. If anything, it's more comparable to a walking sim, though even still, that comparison isn't quite right. It truly is one of the most unique games I've ever played, with the only game I can think of that's even remotely similar to it being LSD Dream Emulator, which I've actually never played. But what is Yume Nikki exactly? I would best describe it as an exploration game where you traverse the dreams of Marotsuki, a young girl who is a hikikomori, a Japanese term referring to someone who does not leave their house or socialize with others, instead staying home, isolating themselves from the world. So not unlike the people watching this video. The goal of the game is to collect 24 effects scattered across Marotsuki's dream world, as well as seeing everything the game has to offer. The dream world itself is vast and strange, with many different locations all with different themes, though they all share the same sense of loneliness and liminality. Despite how strange this game is, chances are you've either heard of Yume Nikki before, or played a game inspired by it. Throughout its 20 years, it's become highly influential, with popular games such as Amori, One Shot, Doki Doki Literature Club, Lisa the First and Lisa the Painful, and Undertale, yes, Undertale, were all directly inspired by Yume Nikki, though some more than others. Now, even though Yume Nikki is highly influential, you probably haven't played it, and I really do think Yume Nikki is a game best experienced firsthand, and since it's free on Steam... FREE! You really have no reason not to play it. But if for whatever reason you can't or don't want to play it, then this video is for you. This video will contain spoilers for Yume Nikki, and the game itself contains some disturbing imagery, as well as a few moments with flashing lights. So, with that said, if you want to play the game yourself, I recommend you do that now, just be warned. But chances are, you're going to get lost without a guide, so during my explanation of the game's plot, I'll be giving directions for those of you who may need a guide. With that being said, if you enjoy this video, please do like and subscribe, as it helps me make more videos like this one. But without further ado, let's dive right in to the strange worlds of Yume Nikki. The game starts off in Madatsuki's room. Aside from the very basic tutorial when starting a new save file, there are no real instructions on what to do, though most likely you'll immediately enter the dream world by entering the bed. Before doing that, though, there's a few other things we can do here in Madatsuki's room. Interacting with the desk next to the bed allows us to save the game by writing in a diary, which is actually where the name Yume Nikki comes from, as it simply means dream diary in Japanese. In addition, interacting with the TV allows us to play a minigame on Madatsuki's Famicom titled Nasu, where we play as this weird red bird thing collecting eggplants. It has no real bearing on the rest of the game though, so with nothing else left to do, it's time to head to the dream world. Entering the dream world brings Madatsuki to a balcony outside of her apartment, and while this area can be accessed in the real world, the skybox is different, with the real world using one of two skyboxes, cycling between the two when Madatsuki enters the dream world. One thing to note here is the shoes by the door, which has some possible symbolism I'll be talking about way later at the end of the game, so do try to remember this detail. Entering the door brings us to Madatsuki's room, identical to how it is in the real world. However, there are some changes. The desk no longer saves the game, instead allowing Madatsuki to ride around in her chair. You can experience most of the game like this, but it is much slower than walking. Interacting with the TV will cause this eyeball to appear, though there is a very small chance of this happening. This is one of Yume Nikki's events, which, as the name implies, are strange events which occur in the dream world, and seeing all of them is one of the game's goals. I'll make sure to note when an event occurs, and I'll be going off of the list from the Yume Nikki wiki. This event is Kalimba TV Channel, named after the Zimbabwean instrument of the same name. Interestingly, despite the African origin of the instruments, the imagery for this event appears to be more based on Mesoamerican culture, specifically the Paracas, an ancient culture from modern-day Peru, whose artwork is referenced frequently in the game. I'll get more into why that may be later, but for now, know that this isn't the last time we'll be seeing this kind of imagery. Exiting out of the event allows us to continue forward through the door, which brings us to the Nexus. Now this door is unable to be opened in the real world, as interacting with it simply makes Madatsuki shake her head. Again, Madatsuki is a hikikomori, so while the reason for her not wanting to leave her room could be as simple as social anxiety, as we'll see throughout the game, there's likely a much deeper reason. As for the Nexus itself, this is the main hub of the dream world, with 12 doors leading deeper into Madatsuki's dreams. You can enter these doors in any order, and many of the locations within connect to each other, but for the sake of simplicity, I'll be going through them in the order which gives the most useful effects. The worlds of each door lead to even more deeper locations, and I'll be discussing the ones relevant to progression as we go through the Nexus doors. There will be a few deeper locations I don't go over, but I'll discuss those after all the doors have been covered. Let's start with this door, the Southern Pink Door. This door leads into the graffiti world, named as such due to the tiles of the map creating a larger picture when zoomed out. This world has, by far, the most useful effect in the game, and it can be gained simply by walking to the right from the door. This will eventually bring us to a bicycle, and we can gain the bicycle effect when we interact with it. When equipped, it increases Madatsuki's speed drastically, and while it's not necessary to use the bicycle for the rest of the game, the speed increase makes getting the rest of the effects far easier. The graffiti world itself has barely anything else of note, as there aren't even any NPCs to interact with. The tiles do make sounds when walked on, which somewhat alleviates the unnerving atmosphere created by the music and the background, but that's about all that's of note here. However, heading to the southwest corner of the map, directly south from the door, brings us to a toilet. This is specifically a woman's restroom, which Madatsuki can actually enter. And I want you to keep this in mind for the theory section, because there's one theory which uses this as a major piece of evidence. West from here is a purple building, which brings us to a deeper location, the mall. The mall's entrance is a group of escalators, though there is a high chance one of them is blocked off by a traffic cone. There is a way to guarantee the cone won't be there, but I'll get into that much later. Heading into the mall proper, there's a few NPCs here, which when interacted with, will distort themselves and walk away from Madatsuki. There's 2 rooms which can be found here, with one containing a pool of red liquid, as well as an NPC named Tokuro-kun, who when interacted with, will fall over, spilling a red liquid from his head. Tokuro-kun itself resembles the painting Apparatus in Hand by Salvador Dali, and ordinarily I wouldn't mention that, but given the similar surrealist dreamlike imagery this game and Dali's paintings use, I wouldn't be surprised if it was an intentional reference. In the southwest corner of the map is the other room, which contains an NPC we'll be seeing a lot of, a Tori Ningen. They appear in 2 forms, their normal form and their lunatic form, which will chase Madatsuki, and when they catch up with her, they will bring her to a secluded area, forcing her to wake up. Tori Ningen are one of the many NPCs in Yume Nikki, which appear to be inspired by Japanese yokai, with the Tori Ningen appearing similar to the Tengu and the Onmaraki, both bird-like yokai, as well as the Baku, which are long-nosed yokai who feed on nightmares. Back to the Tori Ningen, they appear most similar to Tengu woman, and the Tengu's demonic characterization fits in with the hostile nature of the lunatic Tori Ningen. This specific Tori Ningen in the mall, however, despite being a lunatic, is actually completely safe, and instead, interacting with her changes the colors of the UI. Aside from the Tori Ningen, there's another NPC here, E-Man, who doesn't do anything aside from sneeze occasionally. To the left of this room is another room, the Flute Room, where we can find another NPC, O-Man, and get the flute effect. This effect allows Madatsuki to play a flute by pressing the 1 key, which does a different action depending on the effect. From now on, I'll mention what the effects do when pressing the effect key, and if you're wondering, the bike just makes a bell sound when you press it. There's nothing else we can do here in the mall for now, but before we wake up, there is one last thing to note, the posters. They appear to be medical diagrams, and this coupled with the other details of the mall, like E-Man sneezing, the general layout, and the deformations of the mall shoppers, all suggest that this may not be a mall, but a hospital. We'll see more imagery like this later on, but now, we have to wake up. Back in the Nexus, enter the black door with 2 eyeballs, directly to the right of the graffiti world. This door leads us to the eyeball world, which as the name implies, is full of eyeballs, amongst other body parts. This is one of the more overtly disturbing areas of the game, with the music and visuals creating a location that feels right out of a nightmare. This is a good time to mention that most areas in this game loop, which is why I compare this game to Liminal Spaces. Pretty much every location will loop, and although there are a few landmarks to help you get your bearings, you will get lost. I won't say when an area is non-looping, as they are pretty obvious, but know that every area directly accessible from the Nexus, aside from one, is looping. I bring this up now because the eyeball world is especially easy to get lost in, as it doesn't have many landmarks. With that said, to get the effect here, we can use one of the few landmarks. Heading south from the door, then turning left at these 2 arms with eyeballs in front of them, allows us to use the looping to our advantage and easily access this NPC, Madama Ude, which gives us the effect of the same name. Madama Ude, which translates to eye palm, resembles the Hamza, an amulet in North African and Middle Eastern cultures, which is said to ward off evil. This may be why when pressing the effect key, Madatsuki is transported back to the Nexus. This use does make Madama Ude the second most useful effect, aside from the bicycle, as it allows us to get back to the Nexus without going through the entire sleep process. Though, that does mean we can't save, since we are returning to the real world. Now that we're back at the Nexus, enter the reddish-pink door to the upper left of the eyeball world door, which will bring us to the puddle world. This area is mostly empty, with the only surroundings being puddles and the occasional lamppost. The puddles themselves have a dark, cloudy sky in their reflection, similar to that of the skybox of Monotsuki's balcony in the real world. Head south past the door, then past these two lampposts, before turning right and heading slightly north at the third lamppost. This will bring us to an umbrella, which gives us the umbrella effect. While at first glance, it doesn't seem to do much, as it just causes rain to fall when equipped, we will need this effect to progress later in the game, making this one of the only effects required for progression. From here, heading further northeast, we'll find a pink tunnel. Entering it will take us to the dense woods, a rainy, wooded area with a large road. Immediately at the entrance, you'll likely notice this vending machine. We can't do anything with it now, but there is an effect we'll get later that will allow us to interact with it. Heading right on the road takes us past this jellyfish NPC, who makes a chime sound when interacted with. This NPC has one major appearance elsewhere in the game, so keep this in mind for later. Heading further right, we arrive in the Infinite Road, named for the fact that this area loops infinitely as long as we keep heading to the right. To escape, we have to turn left after passing these decorative NPCs, known as Floyags. You only need to pass by them once to escape, but if you pass by them 3 times, another area will open up, so I recommend doing that. Heading left past the Floyags will cause this green Floyag to appear, so keep an eye out for that as you exit. This brings us to Dense Woods B, a deeper area of the dense woods. Many of Yume Nikki's locations have separate maps, referred to as A and B. I'll make sure to note when I'm discussing one of those locations. Dense Woods B is split into multiple areas, though we can only access one right now. If you pass by the Floyags at least 3 times, this manhole will open, with a red tentacle coming out of this. Ignore this for now, as to get our next effect, we have to head past it, to this dead body on the road. This is Shitai-san, or Mr. Corpse in English. Interacting with him gives us the stoplight effect, which turns Monotsuki into a stoplight. Pressing the effect key will switch the lights to red, stopping the movement of any nearby NPC. This will be useful for grabbing a few effects later, and it can also be used to escape the lunatic Pteranogons, though the bicycle is usually fast enough to escape them. Back to the manhole. Entering it brings us here. This thing in the background is Manhole-sama, and this room serves as a transport to a much deeper location. Now, what you're seeing right now is not what Manhole-sama is supposed to look like. That is, if you pass by the Floyags 3 times. Passing by them 6 times will cause Manhole-sama to appear like this in his red, more distorted form, but passing by him 3 times is supposed to make him appear like this, in a gray, much more ominous form. This is, unfortunately, one of the many bugs of the Steam version, but thankfully, most of those bugs are just visual issues like this one. Heading up the other tentacle brings us here, to a secluded, monochrome area. This is the White Desert, an area we will return to proper much later. This is a small secluded area of the White Desert, with the only thing to do being entering this head-shaped object, which brings us to a strange pathway, and then to this. This is the thing with the quivering jaw, an NPC which does nothing, aside from quiver its jaw. The only way we can get it to stop is to use our newly acquired stoplight effect, but that's about all we can do here. So, with that, head back to the Nexus. Our next stop is through this pink and green door, which takes us to the Neon World. This is a colorful area with a large amount of NPCs, all with a neon theme. Much like the Graffiti World, the tiles in the Neon World make sound effects when stepped on, and that, in combination with the music and large amounts of NPCs, causes it to have a very busy atmosphere. Going back to the liminal space comparison from earlier, the Neon World is perhaps the most unliminal area in the game, as its busyness and bright colors remind me a lot of busy city streets, such as the numerous neon-lit streets of Japan. I think it's very likely that the Neon World takes inspiration from these streets, primarily those of the Shinjuku area of Tokyo, and given the game's Japanese origin, this inspiration would make a lot of sense. There is some more Mesoamerican inspired imagery here too, primarily with the designs of some of the NPCs. There is an effect to be gained here, and it's an incredibly easy one to get due to the room-like structure of Neon World. Simply head 1 room west and 2 rooms north from the door, and you'll find this parent NPC, and interacting with it gives the aptly named Neon effect. This one is similar to the umbrella, as it causes the screen to have a filter put over it until the effect is unequipped. There's nothing left to do here for now, so head back to the Nexus and enter the gray door to the left of the Neon World door. This brings us to the Block World, an area composed of white and purple blocks. There's only one NPC here, a floating hat named Mafarako, although using the stoplight effect reveals that she's actually an invisible girl. She only serves to teleport Monotsuki around the Block World, with one of the areas she can teleport Monotsuki to being a black gate leading to the White Desert. However, this area of the White Desert can be accessed elsewhere, so I'll be saving it when we get to that entrance. As for the rest of the Block World, in the south of the map, near the White Desert Gate, we can find a hat on the ground. Interacting with it gives the hat and scarf effect, which doesn't seem to do anything when pressing the effect key. We'll see what this does very soon, but first, there's one more important detail here. In the northeast corner of the map, a men's restroom can be found. However, just like the woman's restroom found in the graffiti world, Monotsuki can enter it. I think this is an intentional detail, but what it means exactly is up for interpretation. It could be as simple as, it's a dream, there's no logic here. But as I said earlier, one theory uses this as a major piece of evidence. So keep this in mind for later. With that though, there's nothing more we can do here. So head back to the Nexus yet again. This time, we're heading through the bluish purple door in the south, which takes us to the Snow World. Before I talk about anything else here, I want to point out the music. That chime you're hearing is exactly the same as the sound the jellyfish from the dense woods makes. Now, there could be no significance with this at all, and could simply be a case of reused assets, but I think it's worth mentioning, since as I said earlier, the jellyfish will be important later. Anyway, there isn't much to do here in the Snow World, but despite that, it may be one of my favorite locations in the entire game. There's just something about it that I really like, though I'm not sure what it is exactly. There's a few igloos here, with one having a girl inside, named Kamakarako, or Igloo Child. Aside from this, only one other igloo, in the southeast corner of the map, has anything of note, a portal to a deeper location. Before we head inside though, there's an effect we need to get. West of the portal igloo is this NPC, the Yuki-onna, who gives the effect of the same name. This is, again, a Japanese yokai, typically depicted as either a spirit or a ghost of a beautiful woman who use their control of ice to lure men to their deaths. Equipping the effect causes snow to fall, much like the umbrella's rain, though this has no effect in the Snow World since it's already snowing. Now, before we enter the portal, there's one final thing to note here. Remember how I said the hat and scarf had one single use? That can be accessed here, as pressing the effect key as snow is falling causes Monotsuki to turn into a snowman. This can be done outside of the Snow World with the Yuki-onna effect, but there is an Easter egg that can be found later that requires using the Snow World. But now, it's time to enter the portal. This takes us to the Pink Sea, a very strange location, even by this game's standards. There's a few islands here, but most of the area is made of water, which requires us to use the bicycle or the frog effect to get through quickly. But we don't have the frog yet, so use the bicycle. Navigating this area requires us to use these balloons, which are the only item of note here, at least for now. The Pink Sea itself reminds me a lot of Magic Ants from the Mother series, though I was more specifically reminded of how it's depicted in Super Smash Bros., since I haven't played Earthbound. Given Yume Nikki's other references to the Mother series, I wouldn't be surprised if this was an intentional similarity. In order to progress, simply interact with this red balloon, then head north from the blue balloon, until you reach a green balloon. This will take us to a secluded island with a cone-shaped building, and if you know anything about this game, you know what's coming. Entering takes us inside Paneko's house, a very normal, cheerful location. This here is Paneko, who seems to be similar to Madatsuki, both in terms of their designs, and the fact neither of them can leave their rooms. There's seemingly nothing we can do here, as interacting with Paneko does nothing, and there's nothing we can interact with aside from this light switch. Flicking it turns the lights off, changing the appearance of the room, and the music to a much calmer tune. Still though, we can't do anything. Or can we? Leave the house and re-enter, turning the lights off once more. Do it again, and again, and again. Keep doing it until this happens. This is Uboa. This is another one of the game's events, and arguably the most famous aspect of the entire game. There's a good chance that you already knew how to find Uboa, even if you've never played Yume Nikki. After all, Uboa was my first exposure to the game, and I know he was many other people's first exposure. If you've watched my channel before, chances are you've seen my childhood trauma video, where I talk about very silly things that scared me as a kid. I bring this up because I'm currently working on a sequel to that video, and I'm planning on having a section about Uboa, and possibly Yume Nikki as a whole. So, hey, if you've enjoyed this video so far, consider subscribing so you can see that in the near future. But I'll give you a little idea of what I'm going to talk about there. So back in, I don't know, like 2012 or something, I had just gotten a tablet, which led me to start watching YouTube, specifically videos about Nintendo games. This eventually led me to watching videos about other games, and eventually I stumbled upon a video which mentioned Uboa. I don't remember what the video was or who made it, but all that really matters is that 8-ish-year-old me was terrified of Uboa. Back to Uboa himself, he only has a 1 in 64 chance of spawning when turning off the lights, and when he does appear, Madatsuki will become trapped in the room. Interacting with the light switch simply makes the lights flash, similarly to when he first appears. Our only option is to interact with Uboa. Doing so brings us here, to a self-contained area of the White Desert, known as Uboa's Trap. Here, Uboa's expression distorts to whatever the hell that is, and Madatsuki's speed is slowed, similarly to the water in the Pink Sea. I'm sure you've already noticed, but there's also this fucking thing in the background. As far as I know, it has no name, and it just sits there. I don't even really know what it is, since I honestly can't really make out its shape. It's just some vague thing. So, if it wasn't obvious, this is what scared me so bad as a kid. Whatever the hell this thing is, combined with the loud noise Uboa makes when he appears, just freaked me the fuck out. Oh, and don't forget, there's no way to leave this area, aside from waking up. Back in the Nexus, head through the gray and red door. This takes us to the Number World, which is strangely one of the creepiest areas in the game. I do think it is mostly because of the music here, but there are also quite a few disturbing connections to be found. I won't be going over all of those now though, as we need another effect to access them. The knife. We can find the knife in the Dark World, but to get there, we need the lamp effect, since the Dark World is almost impossible to navigate without it. Thankfully, we can find that here. From the door, head southeast until you reach this red door, and enter it. This will bring you to the lamp world, and once there, head far south, then slightly east, until you reach this second red door. Don't enter yet, and instead, continue east, then head north. This will bring you to a walking lamp, and interacting with it gives the lamp effect we're after. We'll return here later, so for now, return to the Nexus, and enter the black door to the south of the Puddle World. I expected this to be one of the more disturbing areas of the game, but it's not. If anything, it's more somber, but it is definitely a bit unsettling, mostly due to the darkness. This can be remedied by using the lamp effect, but at the cost of being unable to walk as fast. Thankfully, there's no real danger here, so the walk speed isn't really an issue. I think it's worth noting that this area, a dark, somber, and somewhat unsettling area, is accessible directly from the Nexus, but more cheerful areas like the Pink Sea, and others we haven't seen yet, are deeper within the dream world. I think this could say a lot about Madotsuki as a character, as if we assume these Nexus worlds are representative of things Madotsuki experiences more regularly, perhaps Madotsuki experiences sadness frequently, most likely due to being a hikikomori and not leaving her room. Though, that theory does fall apart a bit when looking at the other Nexus worlds, so maybe not. Still, it's worth thinking about. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we can get the knife effect here, and this can be gained by heading west past this strange pattern, then heading south until reaching these two hands. In between them lies a knife, and interacting with it gives us the knife effect. This allows Madotsuki to kill NPCs by pressing the interact key, with killed NPCs having a chance of dropping 100 yen, which can then be used at the vending machines to buy health upgrades. Is there any reason to do this?
No.
But if you want to grind out yen, head back to the number world and kill this NPC so you can open this door. There are over 100 NPCs in here, and clearing out the room will likely get you a couple thousand yen minimum. Anyway, there's not much else we can do here in the Dark World. There is a gate to a deeper location, but I'll be saving that for later, since it leads to the largest area in the game. But now, head back to the Nexus, and enter the purple door on the right. This takes us to the Shield Folk world, which contains a lot of Mesoamerican imagery. There's a monkey in the background, and there's a titular Shield Folk, who are more decorative NPCs, which means Madotsuki can't kill them. There is one more NPC, Nekkoin, though this one can be tricky to find. It moves around the map constantly, so I recommend using the stoplight effect to catch it more easily, as doing so gives us the cat effect. Nekkoin itself is pretty clearly based on the Manaki Neko, a common Japanese figurine, which you may know as a lucky cat. Once you get the cat effect, there isn't really anything else to do here. There is another gate that I'll talk about later, but this is one of the most forgettable locations in the game. Your experience with the Shield Folk world will most likely be getting the cat effect before leaving the area. As for the cat effect itself, using the effect makes Madotsuki open her eyes and wave at the camera while meowing. This actually brings most NPCs closer to Madotsuki and can be used to find an Easter egg in the number world. Heading through that red door in the lamp world takes us to a walled off part of the number world, and repeatedly using the cat effect will eventually cause this butterfly thing to appear, known as Steve Leaf Kariha, named after the people who found it. There's nothing else to really note about it, it's just a weird little Easter egg. Since there's nothing else to do here, head back to the Nexus, and enter the gray door below the Shield Folk world. This brings us to the Candle World, a similarly forgettable world. This world contains a Mesoamerican-esque tapestry in the background, particularly reminiscent of the Parakas I mentioned earlier. There are a few NPCs here, some walking candles, an extremely fast Torii Ningen, and our next effect NPC, the Dwarf. Similarly to Nekkoin, this guy moves around constantly, so I recommend using the stoplight when you get near him. He does, however, make a sound as he moves, which makes him slightly easier to find. Catching the dwarf gives us the dwarf effect. You can see on screen what it's actually called, but I'm going to be calling it the dwarf effect since I'd rather not say that word. Interestingly, the dwarf effect is the only effect to use a second effect key, as pressing 1 creates a clone of the now miniature Manatsuki, and pressing 3 kills the clone, though this does make it so the effect's primary use of accessing a few areas doesn't work. Similar to the last two areas I've talked about, there is another gate here, but I'll discuss that one in just a bit. We have 2 doors left, and they both have a decent amount behind them. First up is the green door, which takes us to the forest world. Despite its similarity to the dense woods from earlier, this is in fact a different location. They do, however, connect. Just not in the way you'd expect. The forest world is quite strange, with these decorative NPCs named Namakuji or Kairukera appearing throughout the area. When interacted with, Namakuji appear above Manatsuki, wobbling around. There's 2 variations, one purple and green, and the other pink, though they both do the exact same thing. There's no real purpose to them at all, and aside from the Namakuji, there's also a frog hopping around in the northwest corner of the forest world, and interacting with it gives us the frog effect that I mentioned earlier. Pressing the effect key makes Manatsuki do a little hop, but the effect's primary purpose is moving faster in water. Heading west from the frog, you'll reach this green gate. This takes us to the Face Carpet Plaza, a small area with faces on the ground. Like I said, this area is small, since it's enclosed by spikes, so there's not much to do here. There's only 2 NPCs, a lunatic Tori Ningen, and this red thing called Nenrikido. I actually don't know how to say that one. And interacting with it brings us to Hell. This is one of the largest areas of the entire game, as Hell is a large, looping, red maze, connecting several of the Nexus worlds together, as well as some deeper locations. Before I talk about the 2 deeper locations here, I'm going to go over the other entrances to Hell. Now, remember how I mentioned there were a few gates I would talk about later? Well, here they are. First, in the Neon world, there's the Neon Tile Path. To get to it, simply head south from the door in the Neon world, then west 2 rooms, before entering this hole in the wall. The Neon Tile Path itself is a small area comprised of purple and red tiles, with some purple pyramids in the background. There isn't anything else of note here, aside from another Nenrikido. In the Eyeball world, entering this blue severed head, found in the center of the map, brings us to the Footprint Path, and unlike the Neon Tile Path, this area contains some interesting details. Scattered in the area are these decorative NPCs, named Henkei-shita, which, as far as I know, translates to deformed. They appear to be based on the hungry ghosts from Buddhist folklore, which are said to be spirits from hell who return once a year to feast during the Ghost Festival, though from my research, this appears to be more of a belief in Chinese Buddhism, though there are hungry ghosts in Japanese Buddhism too, under the names of Gaki and Yume Nikki, who are said to be spirits of jealous or greedy people, cursed with an insatiable hunger. This actually isn't the first reference to Buddhism in the game, as the head we entered in the White Desert appeared quite similar to that of a Buddha statue. The Henkei-shita appear much closer to Japanese depictions of hungry ghosts, with their gray skin, thin bodies, and protruding bellies. Heading further down the Footprint Path leads to this area, with these NPCs named Gappa. There's a lot less to be said about the Gappa since, as far as I know, they aren't inspired by anything. You can make them throw up blood by interacting with these bumps found nearby, but that's about it. There's also, of course, another Nenrikido here. Lastly, there's the Checker Tile Path, which can be entered from the Purple Pyramid in the Candle World. There isn't much of note here, aside from this blocked off area which we can't access, but don't worry, we'll come back to that later. At the end of the path itself, there's another Nenrikido, and now we can get back to Hell. Hell itself is extremely easy to get lost in, so for that reason, I do actually recommend using a guide to navigate it. Despite Hell's large size though, there isn't much here. There's a Nenrikido, a vending machine, a few lunatic Tori Ningen who are a lot harder to avoid due to the small walkways of Hell, and 2 deeper locations we can access. I'll talk about the second one later, since it ties into a much deeper location. For now, from any of the Nenrikido, though I prefer using the one from the Face Carpet Plaza, Head east, then once you reach the staircase, head north until you reach a blue gate. This takes us to the dense woods. Though this is an area we haven't seen before, our only option now is to head right, which takes us to the dark woods. This is another area which requires a lamp to navigate, and there's a lot of eyeballs here, some of which follow Monotsuki's movements. After making it through the dark woods, you'll end up here, at a train car. There's an NPC here who seems to be riding the train, and in order to progress, we have to make Monotsuki sit on either side of the train car. This part of the game reminded me a lot of the movie Spirited Away, since there's a very iconic scene in that movie which features a girl and a monstrous figure sitting on a train together. After a few seconds of sitting on the train, we'll be transported to another area, though this won't be noticeable until we exit. Exiting the car, the previously blue sky is now red, and heading left will take us further into the dream world. But before we do that, there's a few more things I have to say about the train car. Re-entering it, the passenger from before is now gone, replaced by two other passengers on the other side of the car. Using the cat effect on any of these passengers causes their face to change to a much angrier expression, instead of the usual reaction of moving closer. Why this is, I'm not sure, but we can see the same thing if we use the cat effect near E-Man and O-Man in the mall. Anyway, leaving the train again and heading left takes us to the Witch's Island. This seemingly is part of the dense woods, since the color palettes are similar, though the vibe is completely different. This is a much more unsettling area, in no small part due to the music. There's a few NPCs here, which are known as Naparabo witches, named after the Japanese yokai of the same name. Naparabo are depicted as humans with no faces, and we'll actually see another reference to this yokai a bit later in the game. Crossing the bridge here takes us to a small island with a tree on it, and interacting with this tree gives us the witch effect. This allows Monotsuki to fly around on a broomstick, which is required for experiencing an event later. There's also a very small chance of another NPC appearing here, known as Taze's kid. We'll see who Taze is later. There's nothing left to do here, so with that, head back to the Nexus and enter the final door. The final door takes us to the mural world, named for the murals scattered across the area. They appear to have more Mesoamerican imagery on them, though it appears to be more generic imagery rather than based on any specific culture. There's actually two effects we can get here, the first acquired by heading southeast from the door. This brings us to a pool of blood with this mouth monster, which gives the long hair effect when interacted with. The second effect can be acquired by heading further south, where we can find another mouth monster. This gives us the blonde hair effect, and both of these effects do the same thing, making Monotsuki sit down when the effect key is pressed, which is what she does when it's pressed with no effect equipped. Yeah, so these are the worst effects in the game. It does help that they're super easy to get, so despite the fact that I've saved this area for last, I do actually recommend going for these effects early. There's one final thing here, a manhole just east of the brown mouth monster. This leads into the sewers, a much more interesting area. In order to progress, head left, but there's an NPC to be found if we head right. This is seemingly a trash bag, but stabbing it does this. No matter how many times you stab it, it won't die. But there's no real reason to do that, so instead just head left and go further into the sewers. This is a linear area with a few different locales, starting with this city area. There's actually nothing of note here, so head further left. Here, we can find a few strange drawings by interacting with these holes in the wall. There's barely any time to actually see these drawings in game, so for the sake of the video, I'll show all of them on screen now. Now, there's also an effect to be gained here, if we head further left. There's a faceless ghost here, another reference to the Naparabo, and interacting with it gives us the faceless ghost effect, which removes Monotsuki's face and makes her head hop and spin when the effect key is pressed. Heading back to the previous room and going north brings us to another hallway with this NPC. It looks a lot like Uboa, but this is a separate NPC known as the Alley Demon, and there's no way to interact with it, but I think it's strange that it looks so much like Uboa. Heading further right brings us to this. This is Big Red, a large, decorative NPC, and once we enter this area, we can't leave. So the only way forward is to enter the Beast. This brings us to the Windmill World, named for these rotating objects that can be seen throughout the area. This is a pretty small area with only two things of note. First, an entrance to the block world can be found, and second, to the south, we can find this NPC, the Fisherman. Interacting with him brings us to the docks, though this is only part of it. All we can do in this area is interact with a vending machine, though this one actually increases Monotsuki's health the most. Every vending machine in the game will increase Monotsuki's health by a different amount, and this one, which is the most expensive, will increase it the most. In order to leave, head down the stairs next to the vending machine, which brings us back to the sewers. We can find the final few sewer drawings here, but aside from that, there's nothing left here. So, now we have to head deeper. 6 effects remain, and they all require going into the deepest and most disturbing areas of the game. First, let's return to the Number World. Head southwest from the door until you reach this red door. This will take us to a room with a large amount of beds, most of which do nothing, but there is one bed that we can sleep in, which has a chance of leading to a deeper area. But I'll get to that in just a bit. Aside from the beds, there's a few closets which we are currently unable to interact with, so instead, head to the bottom of the room and interact with this bloody wall. This will take us to the Guillotine World, a small, yet disturbing area. The music here is actually the same as Uboa's, but sped up, which definitely adds to the frightening atmosphere. There's 2 lunatic Toraningen here, as well as a few closets, but only one will teleport us back to the Number World. Now, as for why this is the Guillotine World, a lone guillotine can be found, which gives us the severed head effect. This turns Monotsuki into a severed head, which makes her much slower and removes the ability to wake up. Although this effect doesn't really do anything, this will allow us to see an event in just a bit. Once you get the severed head, leave as fast as possible, especially if you arrive in the big Guillotine World. This is a rare version of the Guillotine World, with 6 lunatic Toraningen rather than the usual 2. But now, back in the previous room, stab the Toraningen. We have to do this to access another location, which is done by jumping in the 3rd closet from the left. When you go in the closet, you'll be transported to Mini Hell, also known as Hell's Crossroad. This is another maze-like area, though there's not much to see or do here. In the center of the map, we can find a gray, semi-transparent copy of Monotsuki, known as Monotsuki's Ghost. A very mysterious NPC with no real purpose, yet many questions arise from her inclusion. In order to leave, simply head to one of the cardinal directions and enter one of the closets. Back in the Number World proper, head to the southeast corner of the map, and look for this wall. If it looks like this, with a frowning face on it, stab it. Otherwise, wake up and return. Stabbing the wall causes it to scream, and open up a path further into the Number World. This takes us to a stairway, and heading forward, this NPC can be found. This is QQ-kun, named after the Japanese onomatopoeia for a rubbing sound. This is, in full honesty, one of the creepiest NPCs in the game. He just sits there in silence, rubbing the stairs, grinning. QQ-kun reacts to 3 different effects. The stoplight, as expected, makes him stop, though the knife and cat display strange reactions. The cat slows his rubbing down, and the knife speeds it up. The real reason why QQ-kun is so creepy is because of what it could represent. Before I get to that though, we need the final piece of the puzzle here. So head up the stairs and enter this door, identical to Madatsuki's door in the real world. Now, before I show you what's behind this door, I'm going to give a seizure warning. There are a lot of flashing lights in this event you're about to witness, so if you have any form of photosensitivity, I suggest skipping to this timestamp. Don't worry, you won't miss anything. I'll explain what happens right after. Okay. Now, this is what's behind that door. That was Face. And fun fact, that event goes on until you dismiss it. So that means, if you don't press the interact button, you'll be forced to look at this thing forever. Honestly, I have no idea what this is supposed to represent, aside from, most likely, being whatever caused Madatsuki to stop leaving her room. Now, there is a theory that this whole staircase area is supposed to represent some sort of sexual trauma Madatsuki experienced, but I'm gonna be honest, I don't really see it. Sure, QQ-kun is a bit phallic, but Face? I mean, I don't really know what the hell this thing is, but it's sure as hell not a penis! I will be going over this theory more in depth later, and I do think there is some merit to it. I just don't think Face is part of that theory. As for what Face is, that's probably something only the developer knows. I will say, it is incredibly likely that Face represents the fear Madatsuki has for leaving her room, or perhaps the face of her sexual abuser, if we believe that theory to be true. There's one last thing in the number world, or rather, the lamp world. Head west and slightly south from the door until you reach this small lamp. Interact with it, and you'll be transported to the blocked off area of the checkered tile path we saw earlier. There's another closet here, and interacting with it opens it, though we can't see what's inside. That is, unless we use the severed head effect, or dwarf effect, either works. With one of those effects equipped, we can now see another Madatsuki sleeping within the closet. Now, this too has some implications, and is a major piece of evidence for another theory that I've alluded to previously. The theory that Yume Nikki is woke. Fucking pronouns! Okay, well, no, it's that Madatsuki is trans. With this closet, and the 2 bathrooms we saw earlier, there's a decent bit of evidence, but I don't know, I think people are looking a bit too much into it. If that's the way you want to read the game, then hey, more power to you. I just don't personally believe it. There is a bit more evidence than that though, so I'll be going over this a little more in depth when we get to the theories. With that though, it's time to return to the dream room. Yes, the dream room. There's actually one last thing we can do here that I've neglected to mention until now, and that's sleep in the bed. This only has a small chance of doing anything, but on the chance that it works, we're teleported here to the Staircase of Hands. Now, you can actually access this location from any of the 5 beds found in the dream world, though the one in the dream room is obviously the easiest to access. There is an event we can see by using the bed in the snow world, but I'll get to that in just a bit. The Staircase of Hands is a small area, with the only real thing of note being these long, blue arms. Once we head down the staircase, we're brought to the underground world.
Welcome to the underground!
There's an elevator here that will bring us back to the mall, but for now, ignore it and head left. This brings us to the blazing corridor, named for the large fire blocking the path. We can't progress until we put it out, which requires the use of either the umbrella or Yukiana effect. This is what I meant earlier by the umbrella having a practical use, since behind this room lies the poop hair effect. Unlike the long and blonde hair effects, this one actually does something, as it spawns a fly when the effect key is pressed. Now, as for the event I mentioned earlier, we have to return to the snow world and turn into a snowman, then enter the bed, and if it teleports us, we have to go back to the blazing corridor. Marutsuki will begin to melt in the heat, eventually becoming little more than a puddle. There's no real reason to do this, but it's a fun little Easter egg, so I think it's worth mentioning. From the room where we found the poop hair, head right, which will take us to the spaceship. This is a monochrome area with a very strange atmosphere, simultaneously calm, and yet unnerving. Heading forward, we'll see this NPC. Sentimental Komuro Michael Sakamoto Dada Sensei, otherwise known as Sekam Masada Sensei, or simply Masada. I don't really understand why he has this name, and the only part of his name I understand the reference to is Michael, which is a reference to Michael Jackson, because this guy can moonwalk. The piano in this room can be interacted with each key playing a different sound. If we move Masada out of the way, we can play the out-of-tune key he was blocking. Heading further right takes us to another bed, and there's a chance that after sleeping in it for 15 seconds, this will happen. I will say that this event is slightly bugged in the Steam version, since the screen doesn't dim before the event, like it's supposed to. Heading back to Masada, we can see now that he's panicking, as the room flashes red. Eventually, the ship crashes in a little cutscene, and we arrive on Mars. Mars is a barren area with no NPCs, though if we continue moving, we'll eventually arrive at a hill. Using the cat effect here as a chance of spawning a dot in the distance, referred to as UFO in the files. We'll see another one of these later. There's also a hole here, which we can enter by using the dwarf effect. This takes us to the Martian underground, where we can find Mars-san. Mars-san is presumably supposed to be a Martian, as all of its fan names are related to Mars in some way. Mars-san, Kaze-san, and Taze-san. If you remember earlier, on the Witch's Island, I talked about Taze's kid, and how we'd meet Taze later. Well, here they are. I will say that Taze, or Mars-san, has no actual relation to Taze's kid, and their only real similarity is that they look kind of similar. Mars-san will be constantly crying a green liquid, and if stabbed, its eye will change to be green as well. I will say, this is one of the most melancholy areas of the game, and given that Mars-san appears to be trapped, I think this may be a representation of how Marutsuki feels. Much like Mars-san, she too is trapped in a single room, and if her dreams are anything to go off of, she's likely not very happy about it. If it wasn't obvious by now, Yume Nikki's main themes are about isolation, and I think Mars is representative of how Monotsuki wishes she could leave her room and explore, but for whatever reason, she can't. There's no way to regress from here, so return back to the underground world. This time, we'll enter the elevator and return to the mall. And now, the traffic cone blocking the escalator is gone. As I implied earlier, entering the mall from here is guaranteed to remove the traffic cone. And with that gone, now we can access the roof. This is a small area with only a single NPC, that being a cat, and an event. To access the event, simply equip and activate the witch effect, and walk off the roof. This will cause Monotsuki to start flying, and you can control which direction she flies in. This goes on until you press the interact key, or until you unequip the effect, which causes Monotsuki to fall and wake up. This is one of the 3 events in the game, which causes Monotsuki to wake up on her own, with the second being face, and the third we haven't seen yet. This is a good time to mention that every single time you wake up and return to the real world, there is a small chance that Monotsuki's neck will be rotated to the left, making it impossible to save or play Nasu when this occurs. Back to the mall, heading back down the escalator from the roof brings us back to the main room of the mall, but heading down this escalator brings us to a new room. Entering the manhole here brings us back to the dense woods, though much like the dark woods, this is an area inaccessible from anywhere else. Going down this path, we can find another frog, so if you haven't gotten the frog effect yet, you can get it now. Strangely, this is the only effect in the game to have multiple spawn locations. This path eventually leads to the teleport maze, and if you don't have a guide, this can be super easy to get lost in. So for that reason, I'll actually be showing you the path you need to take. Upon exiting the maze, we're brought here, to the wilderness. This is an area we haven't seen before, but there is more to this area, and for that reason, I'll actually be returning to this specific part of the wilderness later. We can't access the rest of the wilderness from here though, so for now, return to the Dark World. In the Dark World, you may have previously found this gate, roughly in the center of the map, but if not, it can be easily found by heading east, past this pattern. After entering the gates, we're taken to the wilderness proper, which is the largest non-looping area in the entire game, though there is a small looping section we'll get to in a moment. In my opinion, this is the most dreamlike area in the whole game, though I'd argue an area we'll see in just a bit is more liminal. The wilderness can be difficult to navigate due to all the plants, but once you learn the correct paths, it's not too bad. From the gate, we can either head left or right, as both paths will get us effects. Let's head left for now. Here we can either go north and access the looping area I mentioned a moment ago, or we can continue left. Continuing left takes us to this area with different music, and continuing forward, we can see this. This is technically an event, the Toraningen Party. It's clear now that the music is coming from the boombox, but no matter what we do, we can't have Monotsuki join the Toraningen in their party. All we can do is watch. This ties back into the game's themes of isolation, as even in one of the safest and happiest areas of the game, Monotsuki is alone. But now, let's head back and go into the looping area, the Infinite Wilderness. This area is quite difficult to navigate due to the lack of landmarks, but if you head a bit northwest from the entrance, you'll come across this building. Entering it and equipping the lamp reveals it to be a bathhouse, and we can also see this NPC, Onsen-san, who appears to be drinking the water. Onsen-san looks quite similar to the Gappa from the footprint path, and it cannot be killed, though stabbing it with the knife does make its color change from red to blue. Leaving the bathhouse and heading further west brings us to an effect NPC, the Itan Moment, named after a yokai which resembles a piece of cloth. Interacting with Itan Moment gives us the towel effect, which makes Madatsuki sneeze when the effect key is pressed. From here, head north past this group of plants, and then east until you reach this group. Now, head north through the plants, and you'll be transported back to the regular wilderness. Heading forward, we can find a large fence, the same one we can see in the area we accessed earlier, though, as I already said, we can't access that from here. Instead, keep heading forward, and eventually, we'll pass these purple things and arrive at a large staircase. This is the staircase to the sky, another very dreamlike area. As Madatsuki ascends the stairs, the sky will gradually turn from blue to green, and there's a very small chance that this figure will appear in the sky. This is another event, the Falling Man, which holds some possible symbolism I'll get to later. At the top of the stairs lies the Sky Garden, a very peaceful area with several benches where Madatsuki can sit. Earlier, when I said there was a much more liminal feeling area coming soon, this is what I meant. Sky Garden, out of every area of Yume Nikki, reminded me the most of liminal space imagery, despite the fact that it predates most of it. There's only one proper NPC here, Organoid, who will teleport away from Madatsuki if she gets too close. If, however, you manage to kill it, it'll drop a guaranteed 100 yen. Heading further east takes us to the edge of the Sky Garden, where we can find some figures looking up at the sky, and we can see another UFO. This one is identical to the ones we saw on Mars, though there is only one this time. There's nothing else to do here though, so when you're done admiring the view, head into this building and interact with the flower field. Walking back to the entrance, the light has shifted from red to blue. Heading outside, we arrive in the ghost world, by far one of the creepiest areas in the entire game. There's just something about this place that unnerves me, even though there's other locations which are more actively disturbing, like the Guillotine World or the White Desert. Now, you may be wondering why this is the ghost world and not, say, the concrete world. Well, in Japanese culture, white flowers often represent death, and in order to access this area, we had to interact with the field of white flowers, signifying that we've crossed over into the afterlife. Also, there's a ghost NPC here. Interacting with it, we'll get the triangle kerchief or spirit headband, which allows Madatsuki to turn invisible. This is only really useful in areas with lunatic Toreningen, though you can also just use the stoplights. This is another symbol of death in Japan, as ghosts in Japan are often depicted wearing triangular headbands or hats, much like Madatsuki does with this effect. The ghost world likely represents Madatsuki's fear of death, or perhaps her lack of fear. That's something we'll get into later though, since there's still some points of interest here in the wilderness. Back at the gates, head right instead of left, then head down this path. This will take us to another box, and I have to give another seizure warning. You know the drill. Skip this timestamp if you've got photosensitivity. Okay, with that, here's what you see when interacting with the box. This is the Aztec Grave Monkey, another event similar to Face, though a lot less disturbing. If you paid close attention earlier, you'll notice that this monkey actually appeared previously as the background for the Forest World and the Block World. Those two specific versions of the monkey appear, amongst others, in this event, and the monkey itself resembles Aztec imagery, particularly of Ozomatli, a monkey who was the companion of the Aztec god of music, Xochipilli. Although, despite the more Aztec influence of the monkey, it appears to still be a blend of various Mesoamerican cultures' imagery. I honestly have no idea what the Aztec rave monkey is supposed to represent, so I'm just gonna move on. Heading back 2 rooms, and heading up this path, takes us to another area with a fence. This is different from the previous fence, and continuing forward, takes us to the barrack settlement. This is an extremely sad area, home to the Pirori, or Shadow Men, though they do also appear in other locations, notably the sewers and docks. Just not the part of the docks we've been to. There's a few things of note here. Starting with the southwest corner of the map, this house can be entered, and inside, there's this seahorse-looking thing. It doesn't really do anything, but it'd be foolish to not at least mention it. In the northwest, there's another house, which leads back to the mirror world, though there's no way to return back to the barrack settlement. Aside from those houses, there's a bunch of Pirori we can interact with, and one of them, chosen at random, will teleport us to a deeper location. I really don't like how this is random, since the barrack settlement is a looping location, so you could be spending a lot of time trying to find the right Pirori. And most likely, you will spend a lot of time looking for the right Pirori. When you do eventually find it, you'll be brought to this location, the FC, or Famicom world. Much like other areas we've seen before, this is only part of it. Specifically, this is Famicom World B. I'm sure you've noticed by now, but unlike the rest of Yume Nikki, the Famicom world is styled after old RPGs on the NES, with its main inspiration being the Mother series. Now, remember back in the Pink Sea, when I said there would be more references to the Mother series? This is where those references can be found, though there aren't many to be found here. Famicom World B is largely unremarkable. All that's of note are these 8-bit Piroris, this sub-area called FC Cave, containing the Buyo Buyo or Squish Squish effects, which makes Monotsuki wobble like she's made of jelly. And there's also this area, the FC Pyramids, though we'll return here a bit later. Now, it's finally time to return to the portal in the wilderness. This takes us to the Static Tunnel, a very small area which really just serves as a transition to FC World A, which contains nothing we haven't seen already. Here we can find the FC Ruins, which will eventually take us to the FC Dungeon. This is another dark area which requires the lamp to navigate, though this one is another maze. Before I continue, you've likely noticed these NPCs across the Famicom world. These are lizard men, and interacting with them actually produces a text box where a random string of numbers will be shown in place of any dialogue. Now, back to the dungeon. There's 2 paths we can take, one leading to an event, and one leading to the White Desert. Taking the path to the event will bring us to this room, with seemingly nothing in it. However, there is a 1 in 3 chance, upon entering the dream worlds, that interacting with the wall causes this. This is the final of the 3 events which force Monotsuki awake, and despite the fact that it appears to be a glitch, it is an intentional part of the game. This is another reference to the Mother series, likely specifically referencing these 2 glitches from Earthbound. Now, before we enter the White Deserts, there's one final Famicom world we can enter. Going back to the Shield Folk world, there's actually one more thing of note here. In the center of the map, there's this gate, which leads to another maze, this time made of static. Making it through will bring us to the FC house, which is yet another Mother reference, this time referencing Nintendo's house from Mother 1, otherwise known as Earthbound Beginnings. Interestingly, the music here is a full song, rather than a short loop like every other song in the game. I'll let you listen to it for a moment. Now, entering the house brings us to the basement, yet another maze-like area. We can access two main rooms here, one with an effect. The other room of note is all the way through this path, and contains goblins, though they are very strange looking goblins. They closely resemble the character King Ogrith from the obscure Famicom game Bokusuka Wars, and much like the organoid from the Sky Garden, the goblins drop a non-standard amount of yen. The regular goblins have a 1 in 4 chance to drop 100 yen, as opposed to the usual 1 in 8, and the big goblin, which requires several hits to kill, the only NPC, at least as far as I'm aware, to do so, has a 1 in 2 chance to drop 200 yen. This actually makes the goblin room a much better way to farm yen than the stabbing room from the Number World, as the chances of getting yen to drop are much higher. Now as for the effects, heading down this path brings us down to this demon-looking guy, known as the Famicom Demon. Interacting with them gives us the Oni effect, which transforms Monotsuki into a stereotypical Oni. Using the effect key seemingly does nothing, but if we press it while it's raiding, lightning will strike, causing the screen to flash. Now, returning to the Pyramid Room in FC World B, if we enter the room with the Oni effect equipped, we can spawn the FC Demon in the room. Interacting with the demon here teleports us to the basement, but with nothing left to do here, let's return to the dungeon and head into the White Desert. Entering the White Desert from the FC dungeon brings us to the Underground Lagoon area of White Desert B. This is a small area with not much to it, but the imagery here is quite strange. There's a lot of bodily imagery here, a recurring theme for the White Desert, and there's these weird growths that start moving if we use the cat effect. Heading right, we arrive at a staircase, and further right takes us to the White Desert proper. This area, White Desert B, is the deepest area in the entire game, requiring us to go through 8 different locations just to get here. And honestly, I'm not sure it's worth it. There's no effects here, and most of the White Desert's events can be found in White Desert A. So all White Desert B really contains is a path to White Desert A. We can head slightly north to see the area with the thing with the quivering jaw from earlier, but as it was before, it's walled off. So, with nothing else to do, let's head into White Desert A. This part of the desert has much more to see, with a grand total of 4 events, and a path that leads into another sub-area. Heading north from the entrance brings us to a tunnel, and entering it, we can find this NPC, Monoko. She appears to be a normal, albeit monochromatic girl, but if we use the stoplight effect, she becomes malformed, and if we interact with her, this happens. Yeah, I'm not really sure what to make of this. There's a theory I'll get to later, but I'm gonna be honest, it's a little far-fetched. Exiting the tunnel and heading south brings us to 2 points of interest. This head, which is actually the gate from the block worlds, and near it, this box. This is the eye box, and stabbing it has a 1 in 30 chance of teleporting Monotsuki to a sub-area, the eye world, not to be confused with the eyeball world. This is a very small area, which is nothing more than a black void with these eye people staring at us. In order to leave the eye world, we once again have to stab the box. From here, there's another tunnel that we can enter, though only after stabbing this NPC, Dave Specter. I do not know why he's called that. Heading in the tunnel from the left brings us to a void, with another monochromatic girl, Manoe, interacting with her causes and events, where a detailed close-up of her face appears before she teleports away. What's interesting is that she appears extremely similar to Monotsuki, especially with the longer blonde hair effects. This has led some people to theorize Manoe represents what Monotsuki thinks she would look like in the future, as she's taller and seemingly happier. Or perhaps Manoe represents a family member, perhaps a sister, and given the disturbing nature of the White Deserts, perhaps that family member is no longer alive. Or maybe she's just some weird monochrome girl. Anyway, entering the tunnel from the right brings us to a long, monochrome path with a lot of red. We've seen red elsewhere in the White Deserts, as it's the only other color here, aside from black and whites. But there is a lot of bodily imagery here, leading me to believe the red may be blood. If we head all the way to the left and enter this building, we will see some severed heads in the sky. This is another event, and these heads remain on screen as long as Monotsuki is in the building. There's both a male and female head, and much like Monoko, they relate to a theory I'll discuss pretty soon. Now, before we get to final effects, there is one final event in the White Desert I need to talk about. This one can be found simply by waiting in White Desert A, as roughly every 30 minutes, this will happen. This is Takofusen, one of the rarest events in the entire game. So rare, in fact, I didn't even encounter it. I waited for 40 minutes, sitting AFK in the White Deserts, and nothing happened. I don't know if maybe this is another bug with the Steam version, or perhaps I just got unlucky, but regardless, this NPC is very, very rare. Takofusen strongly resembles the birth defects, twin reversed arterial perfusion sequence, or trap sequence, a rare condition where a twin develops as only a torso and the lower half of the body, lacking any internal organs. This can cause the normally developed twin to die before they're born, as the undeveloped twin acts as almost a parasite. But with all this bodily imagery in the White Deserts, it begs the question, does Monotsuki have some sort of trauma related to bodies? I personally think so, and while there's several theories which try to explain this, I think the most likely is that Monotsuki experienced some sort of car accident, leading to the death of a family member. This is what many believe Monoko and the severed heads represents, with the severed heads representing Monotsuki's dead parents, and Monoko and Takofusen representing a possibly unborn sibling, with Manoe also possibly representing the same thing, or perhaps representing Monotsuki in the world where her family survived the accidents. Earlier I said this theory was far-fetched, but just a second ago I said it was likely. So which is it? Just because it's likely doesn't mean it's true. I do think it's not impossible, as there is also Shitai-san in the dense woods and the stoplight effects, but Where did people get the idea that Monoko was an unborn sister? I'm not saying it's impossible, I'm just a little confused on the logic. With that though, there's only one effect left. This won't take too long. From the Nexus, head to Hell, from any of the paths, though, again, I prefer using the path from the Face Carpet Plaza. From there, head to the staircase we passed way back when we went through Hell the first time, and go down it. This takes us to the docks, another one of the most liminal areas of the game, and from there, head north. This will eventually take you to an NPC, which constantly changes color, known as the strober, and interacting with it gives us the fat effect. It makes Monotsuki fat, with the effect key causing her stomach to rumble. Yep, that's the final effect. Look, I didn't want this to be the last one either, but unfortunately, going this route made the most sense. Of course, if you play the game yourself, you can get the effect much earlier due to the open nature of Yume Nikki, but I personally felt ending things off here was the most appropriate. But now, with all the effects in hand, we can activate the ending. Before activating the ending, please make sure you save. Without spoiling anything, the ending forces you back to the title screen once it finishes, so any unsaved progress will be lost. But with that, one final time, return to the Nexus, equip an effect, and press 5. This will drop the effect as an egg, removing it from Monotsuki's inventory. You can interact with the egg to regain the effect, but we actually want to drop every single effect here. Also, you don't have to do this, but me personally, I like to enter one of the doors, and then return to the Nexus, so the proper pattern of eggs can be revealed. From here, wake up, and head to the balcony. A staircase will have magically appeared, and we can walk onto it, though nothing happens. That is, until we press the interact key. Monotsuki jumps from the balcony, and the screen fades to black. When the screen returns, a blood splatter can be seen, and 2 jellyfish will walk on screen. And this is why I told you to remember the jellyfish for later. This is why I made such a big deal about it. On this screen, we're given credits, though since this was a one-man project, there isn't much to them. We can also press both 1 and 3 to make one of the jellyfish produce a chime noise, similar to how you can make it produce a chime noise by interacting with it in the dense woods. This screen persists until the interact key is pressed again, which then returns you to the title screen, bringing Yume Nikki to a close. And now, it's time to try to make sense of this game. I'm going to preface this by saying, I don't really think this game actually means anything. The game's creator, Kikiyama, has gone on record saying the game is nothing more than an exploring game, and that there's no story. However, that isn't going to stop me from trying. I think that because of how vague and open-ended Yume Nikki is, really any interpretation is possible. As such, I will be basing most of these theories off of interpretations posted to the Yume Nikki wiki, though I'll be using some evidence that I found myself. I'll start by talking about the theories revolving around the ending specifically, then I'll move on to theories revolving around the entire game, before talking about my own personal interpretation. Starting off, we have the theory that Monotsuki did indeed end her own life at the end of the game. It may surprise you that this is even up for debate, as the game seemingly pretty clearly depicts those events occurring, but there's actually some evidence suggesting otherwise, that I'll get to soon. Now, there is some strong evidence suggesting that Madatsuki did indeed die, with there being three main pieces of evidence: the shoes on the balcony, the falling man event, and the witch's flight event. Let's start with those last two, as Madatsuki's dream world, having a recurring theme of falling, could be seen as her having thoughts of ending her life, which is enforced by the shoes on the balcony. In Japan, it's not only customary to remove one's shoes when entering a house, but also when entering the afterlife, particularly when ending one's own life. It's also theorized by some that the music heard in the ending is an ambulance coming to retrieve Madatsuki's body. This theory, however, doesn't explain why the staircase suddenly appears, and why the jellyfish appear during the ending. It is possible that the jellyfish are some sort of Grim Reaper-like figure, as in the dream world. We can find one near Shitai-san, another dead body, and the jellyfish's chime noise can be heard in the snow world, where we find the Yukiyana, another NPC related to death. The jellyfish could also be monstrous interpretations of people coming to see Madatsuki's corpse. I do think that the Madatsuki death theory is highly plausible, but there is plenty of evidence to suggest that Madatsuki survived the ending. As I mentioned previously, the staircase on the balcony appears suddenly during the ending, and while it's possible it was always there and Madatsuki simply repressed her knowledge of it, that doesn't really make any sense. Combined with the appearance of the jellyfish, and the overall ambiguity of the game's ending, I think it is entirely possible that Madatsuki actually survived, and either the ending represents her finally waking up, or it's more metaphorical, and she's killing some part of her past, like her possible trauma. This is where the Yume Nikki manga comes in, as although it is technically unofficial, it was approved by the game's creator, Kikiyama. Now, the Yume Nikki manga serves as an interpretation of the game, and not an explanation, but it supports the theory that Madatsuki's death is actually just her waking up from the dream world. The last few pages of the manga show the ending of the game, with the main difference being the appearance of Masada, telling Madatsuki that she's still dreaming. You should wake up for real. So, go out to your veranda. The last page shows Madatsuki on the stairs, ready to jump off the balcony. I bring up the manga, despite the fact that it isn't canon, to show how we can use evidence from the game to reach the same conclusion. First, Madatsuki herself. Her eyes are always closed, with the only exception being when the cat effect is used. And while this has no real bearing on the theory, I do think it's worth mentioning that the name Madatsuki isn't even a name at all. It's a word, which translates to windowed. With that in mind, it's very possible that Madatsuki isn't even her real name, which really shows that we know absolutely nothing about this character. I'll get more into why that's important later, so for now, I'll keep going over the evidence for the theory that Madatsuki is alive. As I already said, Madatsuki's eyes are always closed, and the staircase on the balcony appears suddenly. However, the very same evidence of the death theory, that being the jellyfish, could also be evidence that the real world in the game is just another part of the dream world. In addition, the game entirely taking place in a dream would explain why there's no food or bathroom in Madatsuki's room, and it would possibly explain why she can't escape. The manga tries to explain this as she's been trapped by an unseen figure, implied to be Mars-san, but I'm gonna be honest, the manga is not very good. However, I will still be using its interpretation of the game's ending as inspiration for my theory at the end, which will combine this theory, the ending was a dream theory, with other theories about the game as a whole. With that, let's move on to the theories about specific areas of the game. I touched on a few of these briefly, such as the theory that the mall is actually a hospital, and the theory that the White Desert represents Madatsuki's trauma, but now it's time to discuss these more in depth. So, let's start again with Madotsuki's room. Take a close look at the environment. You'll notice that a lot of what we see here can be found throughout her dreams. The lamp reappears many times throughout the game, most notably in the lamp and puddle worlds, and the carpet could be the source of all of the Mesoamerican imagery throughout the game. Nasu could be represented by the Famicom worlds, and the red color scheme of Nasu could have influenced the frequent use of red. And finally, the door. I touched on this before, but I think it's very intentional that the face events uses the exact same door as the one which leads outside of Madotsuki's apartment. Since face likely represents whatever Madotsuki thinks is outside, let's finally talk about what that could be. Let's start with the White Desert. The bodily imagery here already suggests that Madotsuki could have some sort of trauma related to bodies, but as I touched on before, it's possible that Madotsuki, or one of her family members, experienced a car accident. As a reminder, if this theory is to be believed, the severed heads represent Madotsuki's parents, though I think Shitai-san also likely represents them, particularly her father. Manoko and Takofusen represent a possibly unborn sister, and Manoe represents either another sister or a happier Madotsuki. Now, the exact reasoning why it's a car accident is all because of the stoplight effect. While we don't need the stoplight to see the severed heads, Manoe or Takofusen, we do need it for the Manoko event, and we gain it from Chitai-san, who, as you may remember, is on a road, blocked off by traffic cones. Perhaps the appearance of Manoko during her event is representative of how Madotsuki can't imagine what a person would look like after a car accident, though that contradicts with Shitai-san. People have theorized that Monoko's extra limbs are supposed to represent bones sticking out of her, but honestly, I don't think that's supposed to be the case. While I do think this is one of the more plausible theories, as it gives her a valid reason for not leaving her room and explain her lack of parents, some of the evidence just doesn't quite line up. This will be a recurring theme with the theories, no matter how plausible they may sound. Something will contradict them. If we really want to play into the theory that Madotsuki experienced a car accident, perhaps, if the game is indeed entirely a dream, Madotsuki was in a coma.
But hey, that's just a theory. A game theory.
Okay. I don't actually believe that. Let's move on to another theory. This one a bit darker than the last. This theory is that Madotsuki experienced sexual trauma in the past. This theory focuses on number worlds, which many theorize as representative of a school. One thing to remember is that the knife effect is commonly interpreted as representing Madotsuki's possible violent tendencies, and as I already discussed, it being acquired in the dark world is seen as her repressing those supposed violent tendencies. So, using it to unlock an area by stabbing a zipper tile with a very phallic NPC inside said area, Yukio-kun, combined with the supposed phallic imagery face is supposed to represent, though again I think that is a bit of a stretch, leads me to believe that the face events, given its use of the same door that leads to the outside world, is representative of SA Madotsuki experienced. And since we don't know how old she is, it's possible that she was a child when this happened. I didn't think that child abuse would be something I talk about 2 videos in a row, but here we are. One final thing of note with the number worlds, if it is truly representative of such trauma, is that the door is strangely louder than every other one in the game. So, maybe, since so much of this theory revolves around the number worlds, it really does contain Madotsuki's trauma. Now, there is actually more evidence for this, as if we go back to the mall, which is, again, supposedly a hospital, the posters do appear to be depicting possible sexual acts. Personally though, I think the theory falls apart a bit here. There is one final piece of evidence, that being the Floyags from the Infinite Road. People say they're shaped like a uterus, but I think it's only vaguely. Besides, if that was the case, why would the Floyags be in the dense woods? Anyway, I'm not sure how much longer I can talk about this theory without getting demonetized, so let's move on before YouTube takes this video down. Let's move on to a much lighter theory, that being another one I briefly touched on, the Madotsuki is trans theory. I'm going to say right off the bat, I don't believe this theory, but if you do, I think that's perfectly valid. Trans people are real, they're valid, and if you don't like that, get out of my house! Hell, if you believe any of the theories I've talked about, or will talk about, I think that's valid. That's kind of the beauty of this game. With how open-ended and vague it is, you can really interpret it to mean anything, meaning it can connect with anyone. So, again, if you believe this theory, more power to you. I just personally don't. Anyway, let's go back to the bathrooms. Let's go back to the bathrooms, all the way back in the graffiti and block worlds. As I said before, Madotsuki can enter both of these, leading some people to believe that perhaps Madotsuki has experience using both. If we go back to the bodily imagery from before, perhaps if the Floyags do truly represent a uterus, it could represent how she wants one, assuming she's trans femme anyway. This could also explain Kyukyukun's seemingly malevolent nature, as it could represent how Madotsuki doesn't want to be a man, with face perhaps representing dysphoria or social rejection. In addition, there's the closet Madotsuki. This is supposedly representative of Madotsuki being in the closets. And finally, the sewer drawings could be representative of people coming out of the closets, as many of them appear to be clawing out of something. With this in mind, perhaps the ending is representative of Madotsuki coming out and accepting herself. I want to iterate again. I really don't believe this theory. Honestly, I think all of the evidence is reaching really hard, and yeah, I just don't see it. I'm sorry. If anything, honestly, I feel like some of the assumptions it makes might actually be harmful, but that's not really something I'm an expert on, so I'll let you all be the judge of that. However, I do think Yume Nikki definitely contains themes of identity, and there's a few more theories that go into that. First, the various uses of Nabarabo could be representative of how Madotsuki feels faceless, or how she perhaps feels she lacks an identity. There's also the possible explanation for all of the Mesoamerican imagery, that being that Madotsuki has some sort of ancestry from that part of the world, most likely Peruvian ancestry, due to all of the Paracas imagery. But honestly, I don't really believe that either. Sure, it's possible that Madotsuki is Japanese Peruvian, but the only evidence is the imagery in the game, which could also be there because Kikiyama thought it fit the game's themes, since a lot of Mesoamerican cultures, including the Paracas, believed that dreams had power. Now, let's move on to more themes that I think are absolutely present in Yume Nikki: isolation and anxiety. There's many areas of the game where there's eyes which stare at Madotsuki. In the eyeball world, eye world, dark woods, infinite road, and barrack settlement. Uboa could possibly represent the fear Madotsuki has when making friends, as she worries that if she gets on someone's, in this case Panako's, bad side, she could be harmed. This actually ties back into the manga, where Madotsuki actually does try to befriend Panako, who then transforms into Uboa, causing Madotsuki to kind of go crazy and start killing everybody. Like I said, the Yume Nikki manga is not very good. It's also possible that Madotsuki has a fear of being touched, or that she wishes to have a lot of personal space. which could explain the hand imagery in areas like the Staircase of Hands, Eyeball World, White Deserts, and Dark World. This could possibly tie back into the SA theory, but like I said earlier, I'm not sure how much more I can talk about that without YouTube smiting me down. But that's about all I have for the anxiety end. So let's move over to the themes of isolation. This is barely even a theory, as of course the game about a hikikomori has themes of isolation, but think back to the Toriningen party in the wilderness. Remember how no matter what we did, we couldn't access the party for ourselves. Perhaps in the past, Marotsuki had been to parties, and similar to the Toriningen party, she simply sat from a distance and observed. Speaking of Toriningen, their ability to trap Marotsuki in isolated areas could be seen as representation of how Marotsuki feels isolated in her room, and Uboa could be seen as an extreme example of that, given the much more nightmarish trap he brings her to. Closet Marotsuki could be more representation of how she feels trapped and enclosed in a small space, and Paneko and Marsan, two similarly isolated, seemingly trapped characters, could be seen as Marotsuki trying to relate herself to others experiencing the same thing. Marotsuki's lucid dreaming could represent her desire to explore, with the various exotic locations representing how she wants to see more of the world. And in the case of Mars, perhaps other worlds. Neon World possibly representing Shinjuku, or another similar place like Times Square, or any other big city really, could represent how Marotsuki wants to visit those places. Really, I truly think this is the most likely theory. As I said previously, of course this game has themes of isolation and anxiety. After all, I opened this video by talking about how it reminded me of liminal spaces, and those two commonly feature themes of isolation and anxiety. Now, as I said at the start of this segment, most of these theories I gathered from the Yume Nikki wiki, though I have tried to put my own spin on them. This last one, however, is fully my own. Well, partially. I did pretty much just put a few of those past theories together in an attempt to explain the entire game, but I'm not sure if I still fully believe it. I really do think that this game means whatever you want it to mean, so please, don't take my word as fact. With that being said, here's my personal explanation of Yume Nikki. Let's start at the beginning. Before the events of the game, Marotsuki experienced some form of trauma. I personally think the most likely trauma she could have experienced is that her family died in a car accident, but really, anything could be possible. I know that's kind of a cop-out, but really, this game is so vague that anything could be possible. I, however, find the car accident theory to be most plausible. After the car accident, Marotsuki was bullied in school, and now in the dream world, the Torii Ningen represent her bullies. The number world represents her school, and while face could represent something much, much darker, it could also represent the fear Marotsuki has for going outside. After her bullying, likely due to whatever events happened in her past, she became a hikikomori, and eventually learned how to lucid dream. In her dreams, she relives her trauma, while fulfilling her wish of exploring the outside world, something she can't do in the real world due to her self-imposed isolation. The dense woods possibly represent where the accident took place, and the White Desert maybe represents the deepest part of Marotsuki's mind, or perhaps an afterlife of some sorts, given the possible symbolism of the NPCs and events there. The mall, if it truly is a hospital, might represent the hospital Marotsuki was taken to after the accident, and perhaps the witch's flight event represents a previous attempt of Marotsuki taking her own life, or her thoughts of doing so. The Sky Garden, with its connection to the ghost world, could represent a form of heaven, and hell could represent Marotsuki's idea of hell, with the Marotsuki's ghost NPC representing Marotsuki's belief that she will go to hell when she dies. Many of the more exotic locations, such as the spaceship, Mars, and even places like the Pink Sea, likely represent Monotsuki's desire to explore, and characters like Panako and Mars-san are representative of her feelings of isolation. The Mesoamerican, particularly Paraka's, imagery could be from Monotsuki's interest in the culture, as their beliefs gave dreams high significance. The effects scattered across the dream world could be representative of Monotsuki's memories or past trauma, and her gathering all of them could be seen as her accepting her past, with the ending, which actually takes place in the dream world, being representative of Monotsuki killing her trauma and moving on with her life. And that is the best explanation I got. I will admit, I did kind of steal the ending from the manga, as it's the one thing I think it actually did well with its interpretation. But like I said at the start, I really just took a bunch of theories and put them together for this one. I'm not going to pretend that nobody else has come to the same conclusion that I have, so while I call this my own personal theory, it really isn't. Although, like I said at the start, maybe this game doesn't mean anything. After all, if any interpretation is possible, and any interpretation is possibly correct, that would include the interpretation that it's nothing more than a weird game about dreams. And honestly, I think that's a valid interpretation too. If you want to believe Yume Nikki is about nothing, you can, and it's not a wrong interpretation to have. And if you want to believe it's about overcoming trauma, that's also correct. I think it's a great thing for anyone to be able to come to any conclusion and have it be correct. And I think that fits the spirit of a game about dreams perfectly. I want to end this video off by reviewing Yume Nikki, more or less. If you couldn't tell by now, I absolutely love this game, and I think it deserves far more recognition, at least in the West. I'm not entirely sure how popular Yume Nikki is elsewhere, but I do know it has a much larger following in Japan, which makes sense given that until the Steam release, there was actually no official English translation. I really want to hammer home just how influential this game is. I wasn't kidding earlier when I said Yume Nikki inspired Undertale, and chances are, if you've played, or at least seen Undertale, you've likely noticed the points of inspiration while I was going through the game. Just in case though, here's some examples. Oboa looks quite similar to Gaster, Frisk and Monotsuki both have seemingly closed eyes, the waterfall in Undertale is quite similar to the docks in Yume Nikki, and many NPCs in both games look similar to each other. Now, of course, Undertale isn't a Yume Nikki ripoff or anything, since they are vastly different games at their core, but still, there's plenty of pretty clear inspiration, and that's not unique to Undertale. Amori, Doki Doki Literature Club, One Shot, the Lisa games, and many, many more, all either have clear inspiration from Yume Nikki, or the creators have gone out and said that Yume Nikki inspired them. And that's not even getting into the Yume Nikki fan games, like Yume Tuki, .flow, and countless others which are all, obviously, directly inspired by Yume Nikki. Aside from those games, there's the other semi-official Yume Nikki content, like the pseudo remake, Yume Nikki Dream Diary, as well as the manga, a light novel, and 2 albums, what the fuck? And aside from that, there's also countless more fan creations that I simply just do not have the time to talk about. It's strange to think how this one game, made by one unknown Japanese person in 2004, has inspired so many people. Hell, it's inspired me. I wasn't 100% sure if I was going to make this video, but after playing Yume Nikki, I realized that I had to. Let's go back to the beginning, where I compared Yume Nikki to liminal space imagery. I'm, of course, not the first one to make this comparison, as you can actually find a lot of videos of liminal spaces, or otherwise unnerving, dreamlike images, accompanied by Yume Nikki music. Honestly, the music is a huge part in why I feel Yume Nikki is a liminal game, as while the visuals of the game don't always capture the emotion of liminal spaces, when they do, it's in no small part because of the ambient music in the background. Areas like the Sky Garden, the Wilderness, Monotsuki's Dream Room, Mars, the docks, Puddle World, and the mall roof all perfectly capture the atmosphere and emotion of dreams and of liminal spaces. That isn't to say the rest of the game has no liminality to it. It's just the rest of the game is far more dreamlike than anything else. The Pink Sea and the Dense Woods in particular are some of the most dreamlike areas to me, with Hell and the White Deserts being far more nightmarish. It's with the popularity of liminal spaces that I hope Yume Nikki is brought back into the limelight, as a game with such perfect atmosphere deserves to be recognized. Of course, Yume Nikki did have a wave of popularity back in the early 2010s, but that was mostly due to the game's creepiness, and I've been talking about how I want it to be recognized for other reasons. Now, what are my thoughts on the game itself? Well, of course, I like the game, and I do think it is good, but I can recognize that it's not for everybody. It is incredibly easy to get lost without a guide, and while the atmosphere of the game is incredible, the gameplay itself is pretty much just walking. Which is fine. I have no issues with the gameplay, but I do wish there was a little more to it. But also, maybe that take away from everything I like about the game. With how simple it is, the focus is on the atmosphere rather than the game itself, and atmosphere is where the game excels. Would Yume Nikki be more fun if it had, say, some puzzles to break up the gameplay of walking around looking for effects? Maybe, but then it wouldn't be one of the most atmospheric, most dreamlike games I've ever played. So, let's return to that liminal space comparison one last time. When you look at these images, what do you feel? Isolation? Anxiety? Familiarity? Calmness? Me personally, it's a mix of all of those, and that's exactly how I felt while playing Yume Nikki. While Yume Nikki is not always a liminal game, when it does give the same feelings of walking around a liminal space, not unlike one you'd see in a dream, it's a goddamn masterpiece. This game is weird, it's horrifying, and sometimes it's somewhat comforting. So, not unlike a dream, I suppose. And that's about all I have to say about Yume Nikki. I know most of this video was just me explaining what happens in the game, but really, that's the best way I can talk about it. It's hard to explain the feeling of playing this game. It's something you have to do yourself. So, I hope this video has made you at least appreciate this game, if it hasn't made you want to play it yourself. Who knows, maybe this video will give Yume Nikki the recognition I think it deserves. Probably not, but if you want to play the game for yourself, again, you can find it on Steam for free, or you can find an English translation online. There is also the Yume Nikki online project, which also contains English translations of various Yume Nikki fan games, but I'm not sure how good it is in comparison to other versions of the game. But anyway, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more videos like this one. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe out there. And good night.